an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering High Wizardry, Young Wizard series, Book 3, the final 3 chapters, Fatal Error, Save and Exit, and Reconfiguration. In these chapters, Dairine is faced with the gravity, the impulsiveness, and the potential consequences of what she has done without putting a whole lot of thought into it, and she is panicking a bit. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Devin for commissioning this episode. Devin is here in the chat. Now, those of you with a keen eye may recall that the last time I covered this was in September of 2019. One may wish to know how on earth this didn't get canceled, because that was months ago, far beyond the 2-month break-off point that I had said was going to be in place. The short answer is, honestly, I don't know. I feel like I made an exception for this, that somebody asked me about it, and I was like, well, what can you do if that's the only available slot open? Okay. But I honestly don't remember how this is still going. And I'm not mad about it, because I wanted to finish covering this book, for sure. But if anybody is feeling a little bit slighted because they thought that they should have as much time as this book and they didn't get it, and now their thing is canceled and they're bitter about it, all I can say is, I am sorry. I do not have an explanation. Yes, I know I run things. I'm not perfect. My apologies. So that's that. So yeah, it has been a minute. I didn't realize how long it's been, to be honest. It felt like maybe like a couple months, felt like 2 months to me. Once I jumped on and started to create the new session for this, though, it informed me that it was like September 9th or something was the last time. And I was like, word? Like, I just really did not think it had been that long. So yeah, I sat down to read this, and like the thing about these books that really makes it tough is that in the Kindle version, it does that weird thing where it shows like 6,000 pages instead of the, regular book number of pages. And none of the chapters are numbered. And it is just very difficult for me to know how much I am supposed to read, because I can't go by percentages when the final quarter of the book is just a preview for the next book. So I finished the book in this read, and I don't know if I was meant to do that, or if this should have been broken up into 2 pieces instead of just the one. Hopefully having finished it is okay. And if anybody, there are some commissions in place already for the next book, evidently. And those are going to be, I'm taking a look now to make sure, the 24th, 21st, 22nd, 24th of this month, and then 21st and 22nd of February, and then the 10th, 20th, and 27th of March. So there's a bunch. If anybody out there listening to this has the books, the paper versions of the books, and is able to email me a breakdown of how far I should read for each of those episodes, I would really appreciate it, because it is extremely tricky to figure this out. So yeah, I feel like I have not done a good job a couple of times. I did this for another book, and it turned out I read the equivalent of 98 pages for the first episode. So yeah, I don't want to do that, because it's not only, not the agreed upon amount, but also I don't get to do it as much justice if I'm trying to rush through things, because I covered too much plot in my reading and then don't have the time to actually talk about everything. So with that, sorry I had to do that little bit of business at the beginning, but here we are. So these chapters, A bit of a surprise, y'all. I didn't expect whatever Dairine did to happen on this planet that she winds up on. I thought for sure she was going to travel somewhere else again. Part of that is because I don't have the paper book in my hands and I can't tell how much of it is left. So I didn't realize that I was this close to the end. I had no idea that this book is short enough to be wrapped in 4 episodes. And honestly, the fact that Dairine winds up winning, never ever did I think that was going to happen. I figured that she would do what Nita and Kit have already done, which is put it off, which is in a lot of ways the only thing I feel like we can do. I don't feel like there is ever a quenching of darkness, and I don't feel like there is ever a quenching of light. Neither of those is possible. You can fight it, and that is basically the message at the end of this, is even though that she wins with this one being, the darkness is going to remain. There are still shadows. So I appreciated that that was pointed out. But yeah, I just had no expectation that this was how this was going to go. Let's see. Huggabug says, I have up through the Young Wizard books on my bookshelf right now. I'll try to break them down and email it to you. Thank you very much. That'd be appreciated. Devin says, hey, I just wanted to mention that a couple chapters back, there was a Doctor Who Easter egg. The guy who helped Dairine in the transplanetary airport, he was the 5th Doctor. Oh, okay. That's fun. That's a fun little thing. I like that idea. That's cute. Huh. I wouldn't because that's the 5th Doctor who I don't know, like you said, the 5th Doctor. Yeah, I don't know the 5th Doctor. So I don't know, if knowing that when I read it would change my reading of it, because I don't have an image of him in my head. It's not the same, for example, as if it were David Tennant, who's the Doctor I'm on right now. But that's a really fun little detail. I like that. Thank you, Devin. Okay, so fatal error. Dairine fell asleep. It turns out, she finds out when she wakes up that she was asleep for 13 hours. And she is a little bit mad about the time that she lost. And she is also thinking about how difficult this is, because she wishes that she had her bed. She wishes that she could have breakfast and a bath, that she wants to brush her teeth. Everybody knows this feeling of the first time as a little kid that you go away from home and you realize that there is something to be said for home. Even if you're staying at somebody else's house, things are just unfamiliar and strange, And it says, all around in what had been the absolutely smooth surface of the planet, there were great cracked holes, as if the place had a sudden meteor shower while she was asleep. But the debris lying around wasn't the kind left by meteor strikes. So it turns out that this planet has been making little life forms while she was out. And there is this thing that almost looks like a turtle made of glass, because it's silicon. It walked into her and was continuing to do so, its short, jointed legs working busily, though it was getting nowhere, like a wind-up toy mindlessly walking against a wall. She winds up naming this little dude, I think she calls him Gino at one point. This dude is the most adorable thing in the whole wide world. Gijo. I hope it's Gijo or it's Gigo. Maybe it's Gigo, like gigabytes. It might be Gigo. That makes more sense. Garbage in, garbage out, says Devin. Oh, I don't like that nearly as much. I like Gigo like gigabyte. I'm ignoring you, Devin. I do not accept this. But yeah, it is really sweet and wants to learn. It's like a little baby, but like a super baby. And basically what Dairine gets to do here is design life on a planet that she will leave to its own devices. And it is a pretty intense responsibility that she goes into with the kind of abandon and confidence that only a kid could possibly have. Because she really does not seem concerned about the potential effects of the choices she's making. All she is thinking about in the moment is the overall design of the things. Honestly, I can't handle the anxiety. Like, just reading about it, everything that she chooses to do makes sense in the experimental way that things make sense when you're like creating a bunch of shit on a computer. But knowing that these are immediately going to manifest into actual beings, it's too much. It's too much. It's just so, there's so much that could go wrong here. It's just scary. So she's asking the computer, did you teach this guy to talk? Because it can say with and it can say hi, these things. There is very little I did not teach the mind that made them, said the computer calmly. And the mind that made them is essentially the planet itself, which she calls the motherboard, which is just perfect. Each woman began walking around the surface in a random fashion as soon as it was produced. So she picks it up, and she asks, why didn't you go walking off with everybody else? And it keeps saying with. So she puts it up in her lap, and it seems to kind of calm down when she does that. And she says something about how you can't sit here all day, and neither can I. So I'm trying to find the spot where this happens. Oh, right, here it is. Her turtle started to go with her because she's getting up to go pee. And it just does not listen when she tries to tell it to stay. So all of the creatures, she has this computer call them back to her. And they all look like this turtle thing, right? They all look pretty much identical. This isn't going to work, you guys. There's more to life than walking around, and none of you have anything like hands. Hi, said all the turtles simultaneously. She couldn't hear the ones that were outside her bubble of air, but the ones that were inside made racket enough. And she asks where the mind got the design for these. And she's like, I'm going to really need to update this design. So as she is trying to work on the computer, the turtle keeps trying to climb into her lap. And it keeps saying, with. She laughed helplessly. Boy, are you ever giggo. Yes, the turtle said, and sat down next to her abruptly, folding all its legs under it like a contented mechanical cat. Dairine put her eyebrows up at that. Was that all it wanted? A name? Gigo, she said experimentally. Yes! It sounds happy, she thought. Can it have emotions? Good baby, she said and patted it. Good, Gigo. Yes, said Gigo. And yes, said several of the other turtles around, and it began to spread through the air, through the crowd to the limits of her air. Yes. So I love this. This is like they all, and he says later when she was like, why did you want to be named so bad? He says to her, a file must be named before it can be saved, which is some of the most profound shit. Like, it can't really properly exist without a name. This is, a huge thing in magic, that like knowing the names of things. And we know that this is a thing in magic here, which she also would know if she had read the fucking book. Dairine. Thankfully, Dairine winds up kind of coming to that realization herself later and is like, oh man, I should have read that shit. But yeah, girl, what are you doing? Devin said, and this is what I love about the series, Dwayne never loses sight of the fact that these characters are children and they act like children, but they operate in a world with very adult consequences, and she doesn't talk down to us. Yeah, she's just like, I'm going to stand back and show you what is happening here, and that a child is doing this thing. You, as probably a more grown-up person reading this, you're going to know what the fuck the problem is here. But this character isn't thinking that way, so you get to sit there being uncomfortable and weirded out by this and just have to deal with that. So it turns out that the screen is touch sensitive and she can just like draw on it. Like she's got a friggin' like notepad for her computer for Photoshop. And I'm going to read this because guys, I can't. Dairine spent a cheerful hour or so there, pausing for bites of sandwich as she started to redesign the turtles. She wasn't shy about it. The original design had its points, but as the mobile units of an intelligence, the turtles were sadly lacking in necessary equipment. She rebuilt several of the legs into arms with 6 claws apiece at the end of them, 4 fingers and 2 opposable thumbs. This hand she attached to the arm by a ball and socket joint so that it could rotate completely around without having to stop. As an afterthought, she put another pair of arms on the turtle's back end so that it wouldn't have to turn around to pick something up if it didn't want to. She took the turtle's rather simplistic visual sensor, barely more than a photosensitive spot, and turned it into something of a cross between the human retina and a bee's faceted eye, a multiple-lensed business equally good for close work and distant vision. She placed several of these around the turtle's perimeter and a couple on top, and then for good measure added a special-purpose lens that was actually something like a small Cassegrain telescope, focusing on a mirror-polished bit of silicon buried a ways into the turtle's brain. She added infrared and ultraviolet sensing, ears for sound they already had. She considered that it might be wise to give them something to hear radio with too, but couldn't decide on which frequency to work with and let the idea go for the moment. They could work it out for themselves. This bitch just made an essentially unstoppable creature, in my opinion. Like, this is too powerful. No. No. And I know they wind up being on her side, but like, you know, no. The newly awakened intelligence had made all its mobiles alike, probably because it didn't understand the concept of otherness yet. She would make them different from one another, but they were going to have to be different on the inside too to do any good. If some danger comes along that they have to cope with, it's no use their information processors being all the same. Whatever it is could wipe them all out at once. If they're as different as they can be, they'll have a better chance of surviving. So, you know, that's cool that she's considering these kinds of things. I mean, don't get me wrong. When I say that she goes into this without thought for the consequences, I don't mean that she doesn't think about the well-being of the like little creatures themselves, because she is trying to consider that in as much as she knows what the fuck goes on this planet. It winds up like she doesn't think later, but they have solar like power interiors, so if there's something going on with the sun, they will lose power. But the fact that it takes so long for them to use up the power that they have stored is still a safeguard against that. And she paused in her design to look closely at the structure of the chip layering in the turtles. Not so much at what the layers were made of, but what their arrangement meant. At the molecular level, she found the basic building block of the chips as basic as DNA in humans. Not a chain molecule, but a sort of tri-dimensional snowflake of silicon atoms and atoms of other elements. DNA was simple beside these. Any given silicon molecule hooked up with 14 others using, let's see, I'm trying to jump ahead. With the help of the computer, she began to sort out the code. Hours it took her, and she was perfectly aware that even with the computer's help, she couldn't hope to deal with more than the tip of this iceberg of information. So yeah, she designed creatures that would have more associative network and could specialize in problem solving. Others with more data stacks, turtles that would be good at remembering. Mobiles more richly endowed with sensors and senses than some of the others, which would see and hear and feel most acutely. Other arrangement of layers, the ones that the computer identified for her as the seat of the turtle's emotions, seemed an awfully tiny thing. She expanded it to about 3 times its original size and allowed it to interconnect at will with other associative areas, with data memory, and with the senses. Finally, to every model she designed, Dairine added a great deal of latent memory area so that each mobile would have plenty of room to store what it experienced and to process the data it accumulated. So this goes on in this vein for a time, and she just continues on with this design and finally sits back and asks the motherboard to create a couple of these. And the computer is like, well, it's going to take a while. And she's like, oh yeah, that's fine. I'm in no rush. And after she says that, she sort of stops and is like, why did I say I'm in no rush? I kind of am. And she asks for the information that it compiled about the lone one, which she had wanted to look at in order to try and establish a sort of pattern to what the lone one does and what other people have done to overpower it or thwart its plans. So at this point, she's sort of taking a moment to rest between starting up on reading that data. And she looks up at the sky and the sun. And all of a sudden there's this weird feeling of rumbling that's almost like it feels like an earthquake, but it's we find out that it's something very different because of it's an external disruption. This is not something that's happening from within the planet. And she looks up and she sees the sun twisting out of shape. And she finds out that it is a micro black hole, transit of systemic object across primary. A micro black hole that apparently has been around for a bit. Gigo says something like, I don't like that. And I really like that when he says it. It's just I don't like it. No. It reminds me of if you guys have seen The Rise of Skywalker, there's that creature, that little droid that when somebody comes toward it, it'll just back away really quickly and say, no, thank you. Just sort of put me in mind of that. And it says a black hole in orbit in the star system would produce stresses in a planet's fabric that the planet, if it were alive like this one, could certainly feel. Line the black hole up with its star as it would be lined up in transit, and the tidal stresses would be that much worse. And let's see. I'm trying to find the spot. Let's get back to work. Okay. Which display, the black hole's orbit or the research run on the lone power? So she wants to look at the orbit first. The black hole's orbit was irregular. These transits occurred in 20 out of every 30 orbits, and in the middle 5 orbits, the hole swung much closer to the planet and appeared to center more closely on the sun. This last one had been a grazing transit. The micro hole had only passed across the upper limb of the star. Dairine did not want to see what a dead center transit would look like. Not at all. But in the midst of her discomfort, she still found a little room to be fascinated. Apparently, the black hole was the cause of the planet's many volcanoes. The tidal stresses it produced brought up molten silicon, which erupted and spread over the surface. Without the frequent passages of the hole near the planet, the millions of layers of the motherboard would never have been laid down, and it would never have reached the critical synapse number necessary for it to come alive. So I find this really interesting. Guys, am I correct in this assumption that I don't even know if assumption is the right. I have this theory that the black hole is meant to be sort of representative of the lone one himself, right? Is that true? And I feel like this is supposed to be a bit of a symbolism where it's this thing is painful and uncomfortable and a little bit dangerous, but when it happens, it sort of leads to growth and things that change and become better due to it. So there's almost an assertion here that pain and discomfort and a little bit of destruction isn't necessarily always a negative thing. that it can be super important to the development of something. But in that moment, of course, you can't help but feel like this isn't something that you want to be going through. I mean, how many of us can say, looking back at our lives, that some of the things we wanted to happen the least wound up being the best things for us in the end? You know, the breakdown of my marriage with Brendan, it was one of the most horrifically painful things. And yet it led to me getting a much clearer understanding of who I am as a person, what I'm capable of, the lies I'm willing to tell myself and other people, and the ways in which I need to learn to cope with things and be more mature about them. And then it also led to me meeting Owen and the podcast actually like taking off because I began to like experiment with doing things myself. There's a lot that would not have happened had it not been for this other thing falling apart. So she then begins to read about the lone power, and started skimming the presses before it for common factors. And she starts to literally sweat as she realizes that she can't figure out any commonalities in these stories. Some people seem to beat the lone one by sheer luck. Some people did nothing that she could see and yet ruined its plans utterly. One wizard on a planet of Altair had changed the whole course of his world's history by inviting a person he knew to be inhabited by the lone one to dinner. And the next day, the Altairans' problems, which Dairine also did not understand, except that it had something to do with the texture of their fur, simply began to clear up, apparently by itself. I am so deeply interested to know what the fuck that's about. I feel like that is a story that the author definitely like has written in full somewhere. And it's just like, that's for me. You guys don't need to know about it, but I'll give you these little tantalizing bits of it that really don't sound like they make any sense on the surface. So she's trying to like find something and decides to zero in on what went down with her sister. So she goes back and reads that. And she thinks to herself, she wished she had Nita there to ask her. But no, Dairine didn't think she could cope with Nita at the moment. Her sister would certainly rip into her for doing dumb things, and Dairine wasn't in the mood, considering how many dumb things she had done in the past day and a half. This is so beautifully reminiscent of what happens later, because Dairine, when she starts to like hit at the lone one, part of that is saying things like, you want to be part of this light again. You miss it, and you won't even admit to yourself that you miss it and that you want it. And that's exactly what she's doing here. She's thinking about how she wishes her sister were here, that she could ask for some advice, that she wishes she had read the book, and then immediately is angry at herself for having those thoughts and wanting help and wanting anybody else to be there for her and needing somebody. Like she resents needing people. And I can relate a lot. So the computer begins to create these things. And I love this. Gigo says data transfer to her when it wants to ask a question. And it asks, why do you transfer data so slowly? And she has to be like, look, it's not really slow. For us, it's actually very quick. I'm just a different kind of life form than you. And they begin calling her slow life. And this is it says, I see it in the data the Lightbringer gave us, said Gigo. Dairine glanced over at the computer. It calls it Lightbringer. Interesting. What is the purpose of this new program run? When I'm gone, you're going to need to be able to make your own changes in the world. So I'm making you mobiles that will be able to make the changes. Data transfer defined gone. Guys, this thing is so precious. It's like, but you're not leaving. What? Oh my God, it's so cute and sweet. I love it so much. You guys won't be alone. We will, cried Gigo, and the whole planet through him. No, you won't, Dairine said. Don't panic. You saw all the different bodies I wrote into the Make program. You saw how they're all structured differently on the inside. That's so they can have different personalities. There'll be lots more of you. You'll split yourself up. You'll copy your basic programming. And it doesn't really, believe her at this point. But they get interrupted by the creation of more of these things that begin to erupt out of the surface of the planet. They were surrounded by 10s and 20s and hundreds of bright glassy shapes, a forest of flexing arms, glittering sensors, color in bold bands and delicate brushings, grace built in glass and gorgeously alive. I would love to see this on a screen. I would love to see somebody really put some effort into making these and not just making a computer rendering of them. I would really like to see a practical kind of robot made of a glassy sort of substance. I just think it'd be really, really cool. So she's talking to him about 1,000 of you will share every memory with, each one able to see it differently. Everyone else will see it better when the one who sees it differently tells all the others about it. You won't be the only quick life anymore. There'll be as many of you as you want to make. And finally, Gigo sort of accepts this. And it says, will there be pain like the dark that pulls? Dairine's heart wrenched. She picked Gigo up and put him in her lap. I don't know, small stuff, she said. There might be. I'm here if it does. You just hold on to me and don't be scared. So the computer at this point, she says to it, they've all got to have the major programming you gave their mom, but you're going to have to pack the code down awful tight and make sure they still don't lose the connection to her once they're autonomous. And the computer asks, well, which parts of wizardly programming are they supposed to have? And she's like, what? All of it? What do you mean? And it's like, excuse me? That is not how it's done. And she wants to know what the median distribution and percentage is on Earth. Ratio of potential wizards to non-potential, 1 to 3. Ratio of practicing wizards to potential wizards, 1 to 100. Are you trying to tell me there are 16 million practicing wizards on Earth? 16,400,000 and she just pulls away and is like, well, that is not enough. Make them all wizards. I confirm it 3 times. Just get on with it. And I'm just like, girl, what? There was a big part of me that was like, this is a fucking mistake. But who knows? I don't know. Maybe it's not. It appears that it not being is what sort of saved her ass later. So I guess this was the right call. It's just such a drastic thing to do. So at this point, the data begins to transfer and Dairine is sort of swept up in it because she is holding Gigo in her lap at the time. And she can feel the transfer of all of this data. And it is really rather painful. It's rough. And Gigo tells her that it hurt. And then one of the taller ones says, but it was worth it. And all of these other voices begin to say it. And she's just like, wow. And turns to the computer and says, we did good, huh? Indeterminate, said the computer. And I was like, I don't like that answer. So then comes this amazing moment where she names every single one of them. And she has to sit there coming up with names. She uses names from every movie and book and all of the names of friends from school. And just until finally she's got them all named. And then she starts to talk to them because they're looking at her eating. And she explains about how this food turns into energy in her body. And she says something about it'll be ages before you guys run down, though. And they ask her, what do you mean run down? And she basically has to explain death to them. And this is not something that they like the idea of, understandably. Beanpole calls it poor design, to which I'm like, not inaccurate. It's a little too late to do anything about it. Is it? Said Gigo. Things shouldn't run down, Monitor said. Something should be done about it. What if you run down someday? Said Beanpole, sounding stricken. Guys, I will, eventually. I'm part of this universe, after all. We won't let you run down. We have got to do something about this, Logo said. That was when the conversation began to get complex. So they began to talk about how to essentially freeze time until they figure out this whole death thing and stop it happening, which is not how it is meant to work. You can't do this. Of course we can, Logo said. I mean, you shouldn't. Why? That stopped her for a second. It seemed so obvious. Stop entropy and the flow of time stopped, and where was life then? But it occurred to Dairine that in everything she'd read in the manual, either in Nita's version of it or in the computer, it never said anywhere that you should or shouldn't do something. It might make recommendations or state dangers, but never more than that. Choice was always up to the wizard. In fact, there had been one line that said, "Wizardry is choice, all else is mere mechanics." Because, she said, you'll sabotage yourselves. You need entropy to live. Without it, time can't pass. You'll be frozen, unable to think. And besides, you wouldn't want to live forever. Not even if you could really live without entropy, you'd get bored. But it sounded so lame, even as she said it. Why shouldn't one live forever? And the manual itself made it plain that until the lone power had invented death, the other powers had been planning on a universe that ran on some other principle of energy management, something indescribable. But the lone one's plans messed theirs up and ruined their creation, and the powers had cast it out. What would be wrong with starting from scratch? And Dairine has to stop and be like, holy shit, starting from scratch. What am I fucking saying? There are other sentient beings, a lot of them. Take away entropy and you freeze them in place forever. They wouldn't be able to age or live. But they're just slow life, Logo said. They're hardly even life at all. I'm slow life, Dairine said, annoyed. Yes, well, you made us, said Beanpole and patted her again. We wouldn't let anything bad happen to you. We can put your consciousness in an envelope like ours, said Logo, and then you won't be slow life anymore. Dairine sat, astonished. So this is when Logo begins to become more and more obviously the bad guy. This is awesome. I love how slowly this begins to grow on you and how once she realizes it, I haven't gotten there yet. There's nothing more frustrating to me than me as a reader getting to the point where I understand something before the character does, because then you're waiting for this character to catch up, but you have to pretend that they are smarter than you later again, even though it seems like maybe they're not. And she gets to it before me, and I just really appreciated that. Has it occurred to you I don't want to be in an envelope? I like being the way I am. They have a right to live their own way just as you do. We are living our own way, said Logo. Not if you interfere with all the rest of life in the universe. And she says, you all had that oath first, just the same as I did, to preserve life. The one who took that oath for us, said Logo, did not understand it, and we weren't separately conscious then. It wasn't our choice. It isn't binding on us. Dairine went cold. Yes, it is, Gigo said, unexpectedly from beside her. That consciousness is still part of us. I hold by it. Why should we not interfere? Logo said. You interfered with us. And Dairine is like, fuck. And tries to be like, well, it's not the same way. Like, what? I was just sort of like bringing your potential to the surface. And Logo's like, yeah, so would we do. Like, there's plenty of potential locked in things out there that isn't up and out, and we would help do that, especially with a lot of the things that are quick life on your planet that y'all use as slaves, essentially, and never allowed to, like, be fully conscious and free. Let's see, I'm trying to find the spot where this starts to, like, really go left. Here it is, yeah. Her kind of life is life too. We should listen to the one who freed us, who knows the magic and has been here longest, is the wisest of any of us. We should do what she says. This will be an interesting argument, Logo said softly. Dairine broke out in a sudden cold sweat that had nothing to do with the temperature. Listen, she said to the apple, how long have I been on this planet now? 36 hours, it said. She turned slowly to look at Logo. It said nothing. It did not need to. No words could have heightened Dairine's terror. She had been expecting frightful power, a form dark and awful, thunder and black lightning. Here, blind, small, seemingly harmless, the mobile stood calmly under her gaze, and Dairine shook, realizing her spell had worked. She had had a day and a half to find a weapon, time that was now all gone. She had found the weapon, but she had given it a mind of its own and made it, or them, useless for her defense. Now she had a chance to do something important, something that mattered, and had no idea how. So, we go back to save and exit, where we are with Nita and Kit, and they are trying to figure out what to do. They have landed they are jumping from planet to planet, and apparently Kit ate something that he didn't know what it was, and he has been vomiting a lot and is just not feeling super great. And she says something about how she's setting a transit, and she writes its name out. And Kit says that she shouldn't do that. And she says, look, something else has its attention. It's really distracted right now. And Dairine's trace is getting weak because she's been on the road so long. But his trace is clear. It has to be physical to interact with her. And when it's physical somewhere, its power elsewhere is limited. So they are heading towards her, and later on they wind up on the planet right near her, and they can see that this thing is totally focused on her and doesn't notice them coming right away. So it says, she begins to respond to Logo, but she does it out loud, not realizing that earlier Logo was speaking inside of her head. So it looks for a moment like she's already losing face in front of these machines because they feel like she's acting illogically and responding to sentences that were never spoken. And Logo says that she's having a read error problem and something in her programming might be faulty. So perhaps it's inaccurate on purpose if the programming fault runs deep enough. Why should she be falsifying data? She's done nothing but behave positively toward us since she came here. She freed us. Would you have even suffered pain if it hadn't been for her? She imposed her own ideas of what you should be on the motherboard. And the mother agreed, Gigo said. And this goes back and forth. I'm not going to read the entire argument to you, but it's doing a really good job of undermining the confidence of all of the other machines, as well as undermining some of her own confidence about all of this as well. So at one point it basically puts it out there. Why did she make us? And it seems like she must have had an agenda and wanted us for her own purposes, like these slow lives do everywhere, which is make quick lives for their purposes. And she's about to lie. And then she's like, if I lie, this thing is going to figure out a way to out me, and I'm going to play right into its hands. That's the whole reason that it's that's its domain, is lies. I can't dip my toe in there. So she tells the truth. And do we have evidence that this power pursuing her exists anywhere except in the manual and her own thoughts? And he is talking in her head at this point, and this is in italics. And it's talking about bringing darkness and essentially pressing pause on the universe and how everything will break apart. And there is something about the excitement it takes in such an idea that really is kind of making her feel ill. And I dare say you might ask it questions if it ever showed up, Logo was saying, in if it even exists. But who knows how long we would have to wait for that to happen. Friends, come, we wasted enough time. Let's begin the reprogramming to set this universe to rights. It will take a while as it is. And this is something that comes up a little bit later, is the idea that the lone power comes to new worlds and fresh, like, life forms, and gives them something that they don't realize is a poison until it's too late. And even if they reject it, they're still tainted by it forever. And this winds up being like one of the only planets that rejects it outright from the beginning. So they are about to take a vote on this. And Dairine comes up with this idea. Because she's thinking about fighting back and just destroying Logo, but then she knows that's just going to be another thing that makes her look unreliable, and probably it's not destructible in this way anyway, because it's like made of silicon. And what she decides to do is connect with the motherboard, and she instills it with more of her own understanding of what memories she has, and joy and grief and all of her life experiences, so that these creatures can understand the dynamic of life and why entropy is necessary and in its own way beautiful. And it is a really like amazing moment. This is just okay. So she says to take it all, and it reaches into her and starts pulling it out. And there's these like this moment that killed me. Finding out that her best friend was telling other kids stories about how she was weird and laughing at her behind her back. Finding that she was alone in the world, making new friends, but by force, by cleverness, and doing things to make herself popular, not because the friends came to her naturally. Making herself slightly feared so that people would leave her alone to do the things she wanted to do without being hassled. Beating her fists against the walls of life. And I love this so much. I deeply relate to that. The idea of making friends because you are shaping yourself to be a person that you aren't, but that you don't really feel like you could have friends otherwise, and that you don't even know that you want them otherwise because they also get in the way of things. That hits a little bit too close to home. And she's thinking about how it hurts to like relive this, and she doesn't want them to be hurt, but that's like part of it. And also that it makes her look bad. All these memories, they make her look kind of shitty. And she's worried that like, they're going to see this is what slow lives are, and they're not going to care about us anymore because we are shitty. We suck. Why should they care about slow life now? She thought in anguish and shame at the bitter outrush of what her life had been. Cruelty, pettiness, selfishness, almost incredible. Guys, can I tell you something? I have said this before, and like, I don't know if this is ever a thing. I've always kind of hoped that like the afterlife was something like this. But people talk about various things that they want to have happen to bad people. There is a particularly bad person right now that comes to mind in this year of our Lizzo 2020. And people will talk about wanting somebody to be taken out of power, wanting them to die, wanting all kinds of things. This is always what I pick. If I could choose a thing to happen to people like that, it is for them to see themselves clearly. I would choose, there is no greater punishment than stepping back from the story you've told yourself about who you are and actually looking at the reality of what you have done and the effect that you have had on other people. Aside from your intentions, aside from any outside, there are so many moments that you begin to realize, wow, I really like, I genuinely hurt people and didn't care sometimes. Or I hurt people and thought I cared and told myself I cared, but then I continued to do it anyway. So evidently I didn't really, not enough. And there are a lot of folks out there that I think could stand to see the way that they say they feel about things and then really be faced with the reality of what they have done and the way they have looked to other people. And I don't see anyone coming out of the other side of that unchanged. Like, even a good person going through this sort of thing is going to be shook. A genuinely bad person, in denial, surrounded by people who will continue to tell them back the story they have spread, that will ruin you. I mean, you will have to try and come back from it, because what else can you do? But I mean, that is what I want. I don't want people who are out there perpetuating harm hurt in return, because they are clearly not people who learn from that sort of thing. I want them to understand the effect they're having, really get it in a place that is like bone deep. And that is something that I genuinely feel would take magic. Like, I don't know how else to get people to understand certain things without an actual act of magic / miracle. And it's very upsetting to me that that's sort of like a belief that I feel in my heart. But, so she puts this out there and finally sort of comes back to herself. And Gigo is out there already being like, aha, now we see what the hearts are for. And Beanpole says, and what entropy does and what it cannot touch ever. Which, again, I love this so much. And all of them are basically like, oh, yeah, no, fuck entropy. No, we're not doing this. Like, we're not bringing that into, we're not putting that into the zone of the bad guy. And we aren't going to try and freeze things to stop it from happening. That is the opposite of what we want to do. And if you are against that, your programming is in error and we are against you. And at this point, her sister and Kit show up. And there's this really interesting thing. Nita has this, the gimbal in her pocket. And I remember vaguely like looking it up, and it's like a series of like joints. It's a weird thing that I don't really understand what the deal is with it. But she is like holding on to this thing and does this spell to shield her and Kit from an attack by the Lone One by using her own years of life as a fuel source for the spell, which is just bonkers. Like, what are you doing, girl? He says, are you out of your mind? Suppose you were scheduled to be hit by a truck in 3 years or something. And she's like, well, I guess I better be careful. And later on, Kit yells at her and it's just kind of like, we could have split up the drain on each of us, by the way. We could have done that, but no. And I love this. She says to the lone power, I don't want to hurt you. You hurt enough as it is, which is a damn good line. Guys, damn good. So I am running out of time, but they wind up getting hit from behind and the spell breaks. Like, she's able to keep it up for a while, but eventually it does break, and it looks as if Peach, the parrot, has died. Guys, I really thought Peach was really dead, and I was shocked and super bummed. Ugh, that was such a bummer. I'm so glad. It turns out Peach is like essentially a god, which is just so baller. But Nita, seeing that Peach has died, is kind of shocked. Like, she really thought Peach was going to be the one to save them. And like, it turns out she kind of is. But at this moment, She just keeps thinking it's not fair. When you give everything you've got, it's supposed to turn out okay in the end, which like, oh, sweetie. And I know. Yeah, it should. So, I'm trying to find the way. The way to keep from getting hurt is to know things. I'm trying to find Dairine because she is like looking around at what's going on, realizing that they are about to die and that she has got to do something really quick. And she calls the lone one a poor turkey, which, okay. And what she winds up doing is she teams up with the other robots because they are all wizards now, essentially. And she realizes that if this lone one gets away, it's going to continue to perpetuate this harm on everyone else because it's telling her so. So she's like, oh my God, I have to pull it into me and basically like lock it down in my hard drive and then burn the hard drive. Like that's the only way to get entirely rid of it is she's like looking at it like a virus, right? She has to delete it. So they're going back and forth. There's a thing with it snuffing out the sun and all like there is a lot of back and forth, but I don't have time to go into all of it. And she realizes that it is desperately wanting to be connected to the light as she is connecting with it, trying to take it into herself. That is exactly the part of her that is the darkness that can latch on to this lone power, wants to be better and hates that it wants that and resents that it wants that. And so does this thing feel. It is really amazing because as she pulls it into her, it pulls the darkness and entropy out of space, which causes all of the light of stars around these planets to basically expand unimpeded in this way that it hadn't ever been allowed in the history of the creation of the universe. And this obviously is like kind of a worrying thing, like to think about how people on planet Earth will be reacting to seeing this thing that's pretty much against the laws of nature and physics. And Kit wants to bounce. And she says, no, I'm not leaving. I think someone else wants to leave. What are you feeling? And they sort of stop and think about it, and they realize that they're afraid of the light. And that doesn't really make any sense. And then they realize that it's the lone power inside them feeling the fear and wanting to flee. And that if they turn away from it, that will be the thing that destroys them. They have to like face this thing dead on. And there's a line that I feel like I highlighted. It only hurts because you do want it back, don't you? The humiliation of being gloated over by this mere chit of a mortal. I love that moment. It's like she's trying to help, but all it hears is her humiliating it and like gloating. It's so not what she's trying to do, but it's so enraged. That's the way that it hears it. And I like that it eventually breaks through, but that's of course how you would react to that initially, you know? So it finally begins to sort of shrink and falls down and begins to cry. It says it wept darkness with a desire for the light. It's too late, the lone one said. I cannot go back. That part of me I murdered willingly. I cannot find the way into the heart of the light, and they would not have me if I could. And then here comes Pichu, except that she's a dazzling, beautiful goddess who says at one point that she was known as Athena, as Thor, as Prometheus. Pretty dope. And if my brother here is amenable, we can start getting work done at last. Men will fight bravely and be heroes, but for last-ditch defense against any odds, get a mother. Bless. That's fun. That has been highlighted 30 times, according to Kindle. The disagreement happened, there was war in heaven, and all the roles changed. I led the others in casting him out, but I always wanted him back. As did all the others, so my role changed again. I became Prometheus, and many another. I was sent to you again and again to put the power in your hands, wizardry and other powers. I never had to steal it. It was given me. From what source, you well know. I had to help undo the evils my brother was doing, and again I intervened in many worlds. But we had a plan that one day someone else would intervene and he would stop doing evil himself. All it took was the entropy he himself had invented. So that is pretty cool. I really, really like this whole development and the fact that he has decided that he is going to willingly go back. And let's see, I'm trying to find the part where he tells her sorry guys, I'm just flipping through. Dairine turned to the mobiles. 4 or 5 whole seconds it took to say everything that she wanted to say to them, most of it not needing words. Shall we come to see you? Gigo said, bumping up against her knee. You'd better not for the moment, guys. I've got a lot of explaining to do, and I don't know when I'll be back. It may take a while, but you won't miss me. I'm here with you. I'm in you. We will come later, said another voice. We'll come to where you live when we're wiser in being human and wake your quick life up. And she's just like, okay, I suppose. And I'm like, girl, you better be careful about that. And then the darkness is what surrounds them for them to travel again, but it's not scary this time. It was not, a still dark regard weighing on her soul, dark and benign and inexpressibly joyous. It bore down on her, considering her in endless calm, knowing her inside and out, and the dark splendor of its scrutiny so scorched and pierced her with some deeper kind of light that she would gladly have gone swimming in a sun for relief from it. Her skin and her bones and her brains cried out to be out of there, but her heart sang with irrational joy. It spoke to her, My shadows are still abroad in the world. As I have done evil for some time yet, they still shall. Stop them. Stop me. The worlds are saved as long as you save them all over again, every day. That's pretty good. I like that ending. And she, once they get back home, guys, she has to run to the bathroom. And when she does it, the computer just grows legs, jumps down from the table, and runs after her. That's a very unsettling image to end it on. But there it is. And yeah, I really, really, I just thought that this was a beautiful way to handle this. Dairine was the perfect pawn for the outcome they needed. She had the knowledge and, most importantly, the attitude to get the right results. The universe stopped. Everything literally stopped moving. Okay. Nothing out that better describes Molly Weasley. Yeah, I just like this not being enemies, wanting this person back and then hating that they want to come back. Just feels like such a deeply human, understandable thing. And I really I like that being a piece of this. It's so nuanced. I'm so over time. Yeah, I might have read too much for this final chapter, guys. I may have. But I really enjoyed it. So I don't regret it. Thank you again very much to Devin for commissioning this episode. depending on how long the next book is, all of the episodes commissioned so far may be enough to cover the next book. So that's cool. And yeah, I'm excited to get into the next one. So I hope that you guys have been enjoying the coverage. Sorry it's been so intermittent, but I hope you're enjoying it anyway. And I will be seeing you again soon, actually, in a couple weeks with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.